everyone, and welcome to Schmidtless Live. I'm Kurt Schmidt, president at Foundry, and our goal today is to inspire and educate you. So I'm excited today to talk to my friend Christopher. We're going to be talking about how to get into experience work and all the different ways, because there's so many different ways these days. How do you choose? And then what do you do once you're in it? What do you do with your career? I don't know. Christopher's going to tell us all about it because that's what he does. He's been doing experience work for a long time, and I'm super excited to have him here. Christopher, how are you today, sir?
I'm doing very well, and yourself?
Oh, living the dream, living the dream. So, Christopher, tell me about where you're at right now and what you're doing these days.
Well, today I'm working at 3M. I'm
Yep.
a UX principal designer there. My primary responsibility is practice leadership around information architecture. So I'm using that skill set to kind of level up all of my colleagues and to kind of get people thinking about designing a solution before you start slapping stuff down onto the interaction plane.
What? That's no fun. I don't want to think
Yeah,
about it. I
well,
just want to make stuff.
I mean, you can still make stuff. You just have to make some stuff before you make the other stuff. That's all.
All right, that's fair. That's fair.
Hmm.
So Christopher, you and I have worked together in the past, and you also have helped a lot of people in their growth as designers over the years. And one thing that I get a lot of people that are interested. I'm just going to start. Let's go all the way back to kind of the beginning,
Hmm.
where somebody might be interested in getting into experience as a career. And there's so many different options these days, right? There, you've got boot camps,
Yeah.
and I'm going to pull up something on my screen right here. Something recently released. Google is releasing a UX designer certificate right now,
Hmm.
and so, as someone who might be interested in getting involved in experience design, how do you know where to go?
That's a hard one, and a lot of it has to do with a lot of it has to do with where you want to go in terms of who you want to hire you, because different companies place different value on different, say, entry paths. However, I'm going to muddy the waters immediately and just say that depending on where you are, say you're just fresh out of school and you're looking at and getting into experience work because you've been schooled in design and human computer interaction, you've got a BA or something like that, then you probably are pretty well positioned, because a lot of employers look at that kind of background, a Bachelor of Arts or a Bachelor of Sciences, that kind of thing is
Hmm.
actually pretty good formative work. However, that doesn't mean a boot camp is a bad thing. I
Okay.
mean, there are a lot of schools, including Prime here in the Twin Cities metro area, who offer really good programs to get people up and running in experience design or UX work. Um, but a lot of what's out there can be of varying value. So I don't know that I would say just because someone said this is a UX boot camp that it's necessarily giving you all of the skills that an employer is going to want. Because again,
Okay.
employers prize different things. For instance, I know employers who want you to have an advanced degree before they're going to take you seriously, or they're going to want you to have a certain amount of experience, which gets you into that catch-22 of how do I get in without experience, because no one will hire me, so I can get the experience in the first place.
Right. The infinite loop
Yeah.
that is the experience, and the mythical 3 to 5 years experience that everybody seems to want too.
Right. And I mean, a lot of that needs to be thought of in a different way, because there are a lot of people who come to UX not fresh out of school, or to experience work fresh out of school, but who come to it from another career. So
Okay.
I've been a graphic designer, I've been an industrial designer,
Right.
I've been a researcher, or I've had a different role. And now I'm looking to make a transit because I've seen experience work, I've worked with experienced design professionals. I want to move into that space. So when you've got that going on, it actually changes the dynamic. And what counts as your 3 to 5 years experience may be some of the work you've already done. And you don't necessarily have to have 3 to 5 years with a UX title, but you need to know how your previous experience maps to what your prospective employer cares about.
Okay. And so how do I find that information? Because I think that's also the trick because, not a lot of these job descriptions are very standardized. Um, and so,
Mhm.
maybe, and I'm thinking of myself, maybe, I'm early in my career, like you said. I'm interested in getting into this, and I'm learning what UX is,
Right.
and in experience design is. But when I go and I do some research for these job descriptions, they're kind of all over the map. And is that just because this is still a younger career path? Is that why we're seeing that?
It's partly that. It's also partly that there are different levels of what I would describe as practice maturity in different places. Now, there are some people who or some organizations that have been working in UX for a good deal of time and have built up a certain amount of practice maturity. Their job descriptions may be really transparent and really helpful. Some
Hmm.
other organizations who are basically they're just trying to grapple with what experience work is or what UX work is, and so their descriptions may read more like the descriptions for a front end designer or a
Ah,
graphic designer or something that, and it's because it's what they understand and what they know, and they don't know what they don't know, so they have to go with
right.
what they got.
They don't know what
um,
they don't know.
well, yeah, and so you get a bunch of unhelpful, maybe overgeneralized or over specific
Yeah.
job descriptions. So it's really common for someone who's looking for, and there are a lot of different types of experienced designer too. So if you're
Okay.
looking for a researcher, it's not uncommon that the job description you end up being faced with is more geared to a visual designer looking to move into experience than a researcher moving into experience.
Right.
And that can be very daunting because you feel like, yeah, this isn't the job for me because it sounds like they want me to be able to do layouts and I'm a researcher. And yeah, there's some stuff that a lot of orgs could do to improve how they write their job descriptions.
Yeah.
But
Well,
I think there's another thing
go ahead.
we should talk about like immediately, which is how to avoid wasting your time. And I don't mean wasting your time, Kurt, but I mean if you're looking for a job in experience design, I wanna give you a measuring stick to say, is this what I really want to do? And it's important because if you're not interested in solving problems, and you're not interested in solving problems in a way that is relevant to, say, a person served, someone on the street, someone who's going to have to live with your design decisions, and you care about that, then this is not the job for you. Um, this is a service job. It is not a glory job, although sometimes experienced folk get some glory. That's
Sure.
fine. But I mean, if you're interested in making beautiful things, that's okay. There are a lot of jobs in which you can make beautiful things, but the fact of the matter is, if you get into experience work, it doesn't matter how beautiful it is if it doesn't serve its purpose, if it doesn't do its job, if it doesn't support that person it's designed to support in the way it's
Hmm.
designed to support them. So it can be absolutely gorgeous and still an abject failure. So depending on what you care about, experience design may not be the career for you
Mm,
if you don't care about the right things. Because, yeah, you might be able to get in with a smashingly beautiful portfolio,
sure.
but over time, it's going to become apparent that if you don't care, that your solutions don't work, you're going to wash out. So this is, thing one, realize what you're getting into. If this isn't for you, turn around, run in the other direction now.
I love that perspective, Christopher, because that's the thing is that there is, when I look at that Google thing, I mean, it's telling me I can make a median earning of 84 grand a year. I mean, that's pretty sweet.
Yeah.
So, and my job as an email marketer or a project manager or something like that looks really cool that I can make some
Yeah.
boxes and arrows and make a lot of money. So,
Well, yeah.
why not explore that? Okay, that's great. So, let's say, okay, I've decided this is the right thing for me,
Mhm.
and I'm going to go get some education in it. What should the programs have in them that I should look for? How should I vet the boot camps, the schooling, the certifications?
Mhm.
Um, what are some of the things I should be looking for as a potential student when I'm going and exploring that?
Right. So if you're looking at programs, you're going to want to look for programs where you can see that you're going to spend a certain amount of time learning broadly. And the reason that I say that this is important, I mean, in previous jobs, I mean, you and I both worked for Nerdery at one point in time, and the apprenticeship program there was developed very specifically by someone we both know, Fred Beecher, to make sure that people understood the entire gamut of what experience work was before
Right.
they even decided what part of experience work is for me, because it divvies up. I've got my researchers, I've got my information architects, I've got my interaction designers, I've got my visual designers, and a human can live in gray spaces across that spectrum. And that idea of the unicorn, right? I mean,
Yeah.
some of us have heard this, was this person who could do everything. But the
Yep.
unicorn was never really the person who could do everything. It was someone who did maybe up to 3 of them and were kind of a specialist in one of them.
Yeah.
But that was still valuable. So when you're looking at these programs, you've got to look for a program that's going to expose you to research and expose you to testing and help you understand the purpose and the value of those things. You need a program that's going to help you understand the value of systems thinking, of structure, of having a plan for what you're building before you start slapping it together. Because, well, I mean, if you're working in clay and it doesn't really matter what your sculpture looks like at the end of the day, that's great. But if what you need to do is solve a problem or meet a goal, no, you're going to need a plan for the house you plan to build, or a plan for the garden you plan to plant, depending on your metaphor of choice, right?
Yeah.
And if you don't have that plan, you're going to end up with problems later. Like, I got no room for my radishes, and the salad won't have radishes if there's no room to grow them, kind of thing. And if the job you were given was a salad with radishes, you are now in trouble.
You are
Right?
now in trouble. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think it goes back to I mean, as a society, we're a bit impatient. So boot camp sounds great, right? It
Oh,
sounds
yeah.
like I get in, I get out, I get my job, boom, right?
Right.
And that's exciting to me. But one of the things that I've seen in boot camps is it can be confusing when you're leaving on what route you should take. Um,
Well, yeah. I
because
mean, if your boot camp was good enough and you
yeah,
got exposure to not just the visual design that maybe you knew or the interaction design that maybe you learned in HCI, but you got the IA or the information architecture and the research stuff too. And maybe that was where you were a researcher, you're trying to get in. Now you know more about the visual side of this.
yeah,
If you've got exposure to all 4 things, maybe you've got an early idea in the boot camp which of these things excited you most and where you really want to focus your attention. Because one of the things that I have found is really hard for hiring managers to sort out is if you come in and you say, I am all the things, and they're like, yeah, are you? And even if you are, and there have been a few individuals in my life who have been strong generalists, they exist. They're not experts in a space, but they're strong generalists. They know what they're doing everywhere. They're just not the mightiest interaction designer, architect, researcher, visual designer. You have to know who you are and who you plan to be so that you can communicate your value appropriately to this prospective hiring manager.
yeah,
In a boot camp, although it doesn't give you the kind of depth, I mean, okay, here's the real challenge is when someone looks at someone from a boot camp and they've been in the program for a period of months, you're more likely to be offered an associate or very junior position.
sure,
Unless you can make the argument that you've got previous career experience
right,
that then could elevate you to, say, a relative design position or a senior position. If, say, you were a researcher, you've now been to a boot camp, now you're an experienced design researcher, and you've got like maybe 8 years under your belt already, you might be able to go out for a serious senior design position as a researcher. You just have to be able to communicate how your previous experience in research has powered you up to basically use your research skills in an experienced design practice.
yeah. And I think it's that storytelling aspect that you're bringing up, Christopher. I think is really important, and I see it not just in UX, but in any lots of people's careers. They're not great at storytelling
Well, yeah.
and so if I really want to hone that story, I mean, what are some options, what are some ways I can work on that?
Well, a lot of it comes down to keeping track of what you're doing.
Yeah.
And I feel like that feels like a really dumb thing to say to people.
No,
It's
I
like, well,
totally get where
what do
you're
you want?
going
You
with
want,
this though.
but yeah, you want a time card? What do you want? You want me to have said I've spent exactly 20 months building a website? Well, it's not really so much that. you've got to look back at what you've done, and maybe what you've done has been your academic work. Maybe what you've done has been work that you did for, I'm going to say the words, friends and family. Maybe the work that you've done was for a nonprofit as a volunteer, or maybe the work that you've done is something that you did in a previous job that is tangential to experience design.
Yeah.
But it's important to know what were the problems that you were solving in those spaces, and say, okay, so why were you there and what were you trying to do? So that's the setup of your story. What did you actually do when you got into that space? So you were given this task, this quest. How did you go about pursuing that quest? Did you jump on a horse and grab a lance and go charging into the distance? Or did you kind of sneak quietly off into the shadows and watch those people you were meant to learn? I mean, what did you do? How did you pursue that quest? Yeah. Did it work or didn't it? And this is something that I think a lot of people struggle with, is the didn't work stories are as powerful as the did work stories.
Yep.
And people are afraid to share a failure. Especially if it's a failure that's like, oh, well, I mean, I'm going to go up there and I'm going to tell them I failed to do something. But if you came away with a deep understanding that powered your future success based on what you learned in that crucible, on that quest, I died horribly. There was blood everywhere. But now I've learned never to actually go into battle with the pointy side of the sword pointing at me, or something like that. So, I mean, there's value in being able to communicate learning and adjustment and how you have leveled up over time, even if you leveled up in a job that wasn't an experienced design job. Yeah. And that might have been how you've improved your people skills, how you learned to work with stakeholders, yep. how you were able to convince, say, a reluctant audience of the value of a new thing to try, a new way to approach a problem, or a solution that they were originally very hostile to. These things are incredibly valuable, and you have to be able to your point, tell that story.
Yeah.
What did you do? Why were you doing a thing in the first place? What happened? And if you can tell those stories, they don't all have to be good stories for them to be valuable.
Yeah. Well, and I think to your point, Christopher, the talking about the impact you have. I don't know if it's just a Midwestern thing or something, but there's a lot of people that have a hard time explaining the value of their work or the impact of their work or the ROI of their work. It's right. much easier just to tell the story of what I did. Like I followed these steps. I interviewed 12 people. I took those findings, I put them into a document, and I presented them, and then they did something with it. And that's a lot. I mean, that's more than half of the portfolios that I've seen.
Well, it's not more than half of the portfolios. It's more than half of the company websites. So it's not just your designer that's got this problem. It's right. the agencies and the consultancies that have this problem. And the fact is, if you look at media, right? So what was the last show you binge watched? At what point was the story, the plot that was riveting you was, we did a thing? Because if your story can be summarized as, I did a thing, it's not a story. It's a checklist tick.
It's not a story.
Right. So, I mean, you've got to think about, so you did a thing. What happened because you did that thing? Were more people served? Did more money get made? I mean, there's some huge stories I've seen racked up by my colleagues and that I can speak to myself about how the world has changed as a result of the effort of designers. And it's not just so glib as one day there was no Twitter and now there's a Twitter, or one day there wasn't a TikTok and now we've got TikTok and spin-offs. I mean, it's a question of what has that done to people's opportunities? What has it done to their lives? What has it done to their earnings? And if you can speak to how you made even one human being's life a little better, that's a great story. Yeah. Especially if you've met that person and you know how that's changed their life and how maybe you've turned an 8-hour grind into an 8-hour, well, okay, it's not a grind anymore, but it's still a job, that sort of thing.
No, that's smart.
And a lot of it has to do with being able to speak responsibly to the work that you've done. Because if you're a designer, and I said before, your job is solving problems and serving humans, you're not there to make stuff pretty. You're there to make their lives better. And equally, while you're trying to make their lives better, there's the opportunity for you to make their lives worse. So yeah, when you screw something up, owning that screw up and saying, how do you then recognize that screw up and fix it is, again, powerful. But you need to be able to talk about maybe not ROI every time, because a lot of people, ROI means money, ROI means numbers.
Right, right.
And it's hard sometimes in the work that we do in experience to get a number. It's not impossible. You can get the numbers. It's
Sure.
just sometimes hard because the work of experience is often, I don't know how many Futurama fans we have watching and how many people saw the episode with Bender, that weird sparkly being out in the middle of the universe, where really experience design is a vanishing deliverable. And what I mean by that is if you do your job really, really well, nobody notices.
Yeah.
They get into the space, they do the thing, they get on to the next thing, and at no point did they feel friction, at no point did they feel frustrated. They just did what they wanted to do and were able to move on. And sometimes they were euphoric about it, and sometimes they just didn't feel any pain. And both are valuable. So when we talk about delight, sometimes delight is the absence of the pain you were expecting to feel, not the party that you weren't expecting to have, right?
Yep.
So I think that it's important to just understand that lens around what we're doing, because ROI might mean your brand became more trustworthy.
Mm-hmm.
Your company was able to realize more success because it turned out that the customers you were serving now valued your product more. And maybe that does have a numeric measure, but sometimes it doesn't, and it's hard to see because you did such a good job that nobody's complaining about the website. And that's fantastic.
Right. Now on to the next challenge. Okay, so let's shift gears just a little bit more. So I'm looking for my first job. I've gone through the boot camp. I've got a portfolio put together. Okay, I've listened to Kurt and Christopher's sort of idea on telling better stories. And now that job search kind of begins. Where have you seen people being successful? Because I feel like this year, especially, that the networking and network has been so important for people to find work versus just having a solid portfolio and a solid resume and those types of things. If you were to give advice to somebody coming out of one of these things and they're looking for that first job, what are some key aspects that you would suggest to them to help them with that search?
Well, you've hit me with three things which have to be dealt with semi-separately, right?
I see. I love that you pay attention.
So we've got three issues. The first is, what's a good job for you? And let's be honest, there are bad jobs for you. I'm just going to say that because it's true. There are jobs that you can spend years in and they won't advance your career. They may even grind you down into a horrible, misshapen human. And you don't want that either. I mean, there are jobs that are going to be bad for you.
True, but coming out of school, I see so many people that are so desperate. They'll take anything because they want to get that first job. It's like I don't know. It's like you get that first thing over with and then it's all fine from there, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, and it's good to know that when you're job seeking, you're in one of two modes. You're either in, I need a job right now because I've got bills to pay mode, or I'm job seeking in that I'm looking to advance my career and I'm doing this thoughtfully and I've got time mode. And, one is its own stress coaster. And the other is, something that a lot of people let go begging. I mean, you don't necessarily focus on a job search until you feel like you need one, which is honestly the worst time to have to be looking for a job because you're kind of between a rock and an economic hard place in terms of, I need to find a way to get income coming in and I want to be in my career doing it. So I'm going to maybe respond to what's available as opposed to what I actually want. And that's challenging. So if you end up pursuing one of those jobs, you just have to go in knowing that your job search isn't over.
Yeah.
You've managed to serve your needs for right now, but you've still got work. And one of the things that, Vanessa, my spouse, loves to say is, and she's absolutely right, is that when you don't have a job, your job is finding a job. You still have a job. And that does require work. And part of that work is prepping your materials, your portfolio, your resume, getting your story together, but it's also doing research. So the other thing is, if I can say that there are jobs that are going to be bad for you, and then conversely, jobs that could be good for you, how are you going to be able to tell the difference? And the way to tell the difference is to do some homework on who you want to work for. And maybe there are companies in your industry, in the market, they could be local, they could be nationwide, that you want to work for. And, be careful. Just because they're shiny doesn't mean they're good to work for, or because they're big that they're good to work for. You've got to want to work for a company because of what they're doing. Mm-hmm. What are their teams up to? What's the kind of stuff they get to do day to day that you would like to do? So, once upon a time when Frog was an independent company, I want to be able to do stuff like the Disney Magic Band.
Sure.
Or I want to build, interactive exhibits. And there are a lot of things that people who are interested in AR, VR, MR, or who are into visual, they want to find new ways to interact with people. Well, who are the companies who are doing this kind of work? What kind of reputation do they have? And this gets me into the second of the three things, right? Who do you know in that company? Who could you get to know in that company where you could get an insider view that isn't just what you see on the website? Because just like you put your best foot forward in your portfolio and your resume, companies put their best foot forward in their websites and their promotional materials and their hiring materials. They want to look like someone who's good to work for, just like you want to look like someone who's good to hire. That's normal, natural human behavior. And you need to be able to maybe get some context from someone who maybe isn't working there anymore and would be happy to be candid, or someone who is working there who you trust to be candid with you. Because, let's face it, sometimes I've had friends go into companies and kind of drink the Kool-Aid, and it's only after they've left the company that they're actually saying, yeah, there were problems. Now, mind you, I'll say this. No company, no org is going to be perfect.
No.
They're all filled with humans, and humans aren't perfect, so the company can't be perfect either.
Right.
But, companies all have their pluses and minuses, and there are things that are good about being in-house with a large company, and there are things that are good about being in an agency or a consultancy, and there are things that are good about being a freelancer.
Yep.
And all of them have their benefits. And honestly, for you as an individual, I can't tell you which is best or more comfortable for you. Over my career, I have done all the things, and I have gotten tired of one and moved to the other over the years. And often it's like, I had people say, well, the reason you decided to go back to this one is because you've forgotten what you hated about it. But honestly, I do think that change and a change of perspective is really a powerful thing, especially in experience design, to be able to get wider experience, to see how different orgs work. And until you've had an org or two, you may not know what you like. So the first go into that first job may be a big old experiment, right? But in that case, there's no such thing as a failure. There's just more data.
Right. Yeah. And to that point, like you said, change is the only constant, right? That's the thing you got to watch out for.
Even the company you join is going to change, and it might not change in a way that you like, or it might change in a way that you adore. And then someone inside the company says, well, yeah, we're shifting our resources. And this used to happen a lot more when I did graphic design decades ago. Graphic design was one of the first things to get cut out if a company hit hard times. Experience design has suffered from that too over time, but in companies that take it more seriously, it's less likely that experience design will be hit by...
Back to your point about it being a more mature design organization, right?
Exactly, because they value... that's one of the things that you could look at when they have a layoff, if they've got a history. Who do they lay off? Is it always the designers? Well, that tells you that the designers aren't the important part of that company.
That's great. That's good. Yeah, and you obviously people can go to Glassdoor and look at those things, but you also have to take that with a grain of salt because people don't usually go to Glassdoor to sing praises of an organization either.
Yeah,
so.
You go to Glassdoor to complain, don't you? But yeah, so that's the second thing is understanding kind of the network and the company. So who do you know? And it's not a question of you have to be born with contacts. Contacts can be made. You can basically reach out and participate in organizations like AIGA, greater for design than for experience design. UXPA is more focused on experience design professionals. There's the IXDA, which is really for interaction designers specifically. There are research organizations like Rosenfeld has two communities together around basically design operations and advancing research that are great for people who are interested in like organizing the career of design and giving designers like the playing field in which to succeed in, and then researchers, how do I help people understand the value and the power of research? So there are a lot of organizations that are out there, if you kind of look around, that have members who are happy to talk to you, let you join the meetings, listen in, and you can start to build like little relationships. And a relationship begins with maybe just asking somebody a question in chat in one of these conferences or meetings, and you may end up showing portfolios and then having critique sessions, or you may have some people that you met in the program that you went through that can kind of like connect you with other professionals, especially if you've decided interaction design is the thing I love. I want to make beautiful little micro interactions, and they'll know someone who does that, and they'll give you an introduction, and maybe you'll chat and do the informational thing, and you'll learn about their company and other companies they've worked with. So I mean, a lot of it is kind of on you, which makes it kind of suck for the introvert. I'll say that.
Yeah. Well, and the people with these big fancy titles of vice president of customer experience, or these types of things, can be intimidating to be like, well, I'll just shoot them a message, and why would they want to talk to a peon like me? Well, it's like, well, remember, they probably were a peon at some point too. So.
Well, they were. That's absolutely, and they're still human. That's the other thing. I mean, I had some trepidation a few years back when I invited Jared Spool to come talk at Nerdery, and that was fine. I mean, Jared's another human. He's a good guy. He was able to have a lovely conversation. He wanted to know what I wanted. I was able to tell him. That went fine. And at no point did I stop and Jared. Yeah, I mean, it's like,
yes, Mr.
As long as you don't do that, you're probably going to be okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, a network is something you have to build. And this is probably a good point where I reel back a little bit and say, if you're an introvert who really wants to avoid human contact, if that's who you are, and you want to be able to sit in your cave and make beautiful things and hand them out to people you never have to see or meet, yeah, you might not be happy in experience design, because experience design is in some ways very high touch. If you're a researcher, you're going to talk directly to the person served. If you're an architect or an interaction designer or a visual designer, you're going to be presenting and collaborating all the time. Some of the most powerful work you're ever going to do isn't going to be in a room all by yourself. It's going to be where you brought the idea that you came up with by yourself to someone else, and you're all going to take your hammers to it. And if it survives, it's going to be powerful. And if it breaks, well, you didn't need it anyway, that sort of thing. Yeah. But that's the process. And it's not something that you get to hide in a corner for. And I hate to say that to people who I know are on the introverted side of the scale.
Sure.
But I mean, at the same level, experience design also isn't a glory job in that you're going to run around and basically say, I've got the brilliant vision. I mean, there's a reason we've demonized genius design successfully, in that, you can go away and say, it's my idea, my vision, my thing. You've got to have a vision. Yeah. But that vision should have been tested with acid. It should have been looked at by the team, by your experts, looked at by the person served. And if you can't hack someone looking at your ideas and then telling you where you might be wrong, again, maybe not the career for you.
Yeah.
Because you've got to come in with the presumption that you could be totally wrong and you could wreck somebody's day or life. And designers have.
Yeah, that's why I say, understanding, what the company does as a, to your point, really having a good understanding of what makes the company successful and what it does is really important, versus how can I make this header more pretty, or this mega menu less of a headache, or something.
Well, so I mean, that's true. I mean, if you care about purpose, then that's got to be part of your company search. Who are companies that share your purpose? Yeah. Maybe you'll apply to them and not to ones that don't. But if you're hungry right now, maybe you end up working for a company whose purpose you're not aligned with, until you can get that job with a company whose purpose you do align with. So long as you know that's what you're doing, then that's okay. I mean, you got to eat. I understand that. But you don't have to feel like the one job you were ever able to get has to be your job forever either. And it's good to kind of keep the conversation going.
Right. Okay. So let's say, Christopher, I've got that first job, and now I'm going to integrate in with a team, design team. And obviously I haven't worked as a designer in a team setting before. I'm not exactly sure how that
Yeah.
works. What's some of your advice to that person who's maybe going to be joining a design team for the first time? What are some areas to really focus on? Some areas to avoid? What have you seen work in the past and pitfalls to look out for?
Well, this is a mixed bag because I mean
It
everybody's
sure
different,
is.
right? Every team is different.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
so there are things that you're going to want to do when you start, and the first thing you're going to want to do is spend a bunch of time listening.
Hmm.
And I think that's true regardless of how you come in or who you are. When I started one of my previous jobs, I actually made my team really nervous because I think I spent my first 3 to 4 months listening so hard that they weren't sure who I was and what I
Sure.
was about because I wasn't saying much. And
Yeah.
and then one day I'll say this, I lost control of my excrement a little bit and started putting posters everywhere, and suddenly everyone knew precisely who I was. And this is important because at some point, and hopefully you did this when you got the job, and maybe the rest of the team just doesn't know yet, you have to be legible as a designer.
Mm,
What do you care about? Or more to the point, what irks you or pisses you off enough that you feel it needs to change? Because I think this is one of the things that makes a designer is a low level simmering dissatisfaction with the state of the world.
right.
Otherwise, why do you want to design a thing in the first
Right.
place?
Because you're a
Why do you
problem
want to
solver,
make
back to your
anything new or
earlier point.
change anything? Right? Yeah. So I mean, you've got to be able to be legible. What do you care about? When someone brings up a certain topic, like there are people who will think twice before mentioning the net promoter score to me because a tirade will follow. And there are other topics like that. So who are you? What do you care about?
Yeah.
I mean, are you the person who gets frustrated by bad color choices, that goofy font that nobody can read but is really popular right now? What are you as a designer? What do you bring in terms of value? Where is your pool of acid and how do you apply it to best value?
Hmm.
And that's something that you will have to make apparent to your team. But while you're listening, you need to find theirs too.
Yeah.
Who are they as designers? What is their dynamic? Who's in charge? Who can come in at the last second and say, you know, that thing you've been working on for a week, screw it, forget it, start over? Who are these people? What happens? How does this work? When are you supposed to kind of grab the torch and run? Or is there someone that has to look at that torch and get it OSHA certified before
Mm.
you even take a single step with it?
Sure.
Every org is different. And when you're getting into that job, you're going to be learning things about what you're comfortable with, what you're uncomfortable with. Some of it you're going to have to cope with just because it's
Right.
part of that job, part of that culture. But if it's bad enough that you can't cope with it, then maybe that's something that needs to be communicated to your supervisor. And if that feels like a problem, maybe to their supervisor or HR or someone.
Right.
And there are a lot of things that can go horribly, horribly wrong in any organization. And if you find yourself in an organization feeling like you've made a terrible mistake, there is really no shame in running for the hills.
Yeah.
So long as you're willing to kind of talk about why you were working for a job for like 3 days and,
Yeah.
what was
Back
that
to that
learning
storytelling.
experience like? Right.
Yeah. So
So,
I
yeah.
think that's good, because again, as a new person coming in, I want to make an impact right away. I want to prove myself. I want to show you you made a good job hiring me. So, but to your point, Christopher, sometimes, if you run so quickly towards that
Mhm.
solution, you might miss all the other things that are actually important, right?
Well, yeah, I would probably also say that the org that values you running in and making a gigantic splash, if the org runs on gigantic splashes, that's a problem in and of itself.
Right.
Not for every career, but for experience
For
design,
sure, sure.
that's a gigantic red flag.
I totally agree. You've got to be
Yeah.
careful. Okay, so the last thing I want to ask you about, Christopher, is growing my career. So I've been a designer. I'm in the design world, and I'm interested in getting that next title, or maybe even moving up into bigger areas of customer impact, or even transitioning my role slightly from maybe UX UI to something more director level or things like that in an organization. What's some of your advice to those designers that are looking to grow their career? And what have you seen work for people? And what are some things that you've seen that don't work?
Well, okay, again, myriad possibilities here, depending on who
Sure.
you are and what you've learned that you like. So, I
Hmm.
mean, if you want to progress, I mean, there are a few ways that you can move forward in any organization, especially if you're looking at skilled expert professional labor, right? So you can become a practice leader. So you can be someone who gets really, really good at what you do, and you become a source of knowledge or wisdom or training or leveling up for other people in what you do. Practice leadership. You can also become a people leader. So you can be a person who coordinates the activity of individuals, who grows individuals. So, I mean, maybe in the growth of your career, what you really like doing is seeing other people kind of grow, excel, and find new opportunities and find new successes. That could be what you want to do. Then there are people who kind of excel in kind of the business strategery of things. So I want to be able to figure out what the next play is in a changing landscape where success's definition can be fluid, right? I mean, that's a skill set in and of itself. What do you want to do? And how you do that and how precisely you do it can have a lot of different expressions. But I would say that as you grow, and you're not necessarily going to know what you want to do for a little while,
Right.
give yourself time to figure it out.
Yep.
Figure out if you're a researcher, if you're an architect, or if you're a blend. And if you are a blend, why is that blend so powerful? And what is everybody else missing that you've got that you'd like to share? And think about, how do you then take what you are learning and what you are mastering and making that a service to people around you? So are you going to help by coordinating them? Are you going to help by leveling up their skills, by sharing tools, by sharing tips, tricks, techniques, that sort of thing? Are you going to go out and do what I'm doing? Talk to people who maybe haven't been there yet, tell them maybe what it's a bit like so that they can make intelligent decisions about what they're going to do next with their life and their time and their attention. Um, there are a lot of ways to progress. And the question is, what kind of success do you want, and how do you measure it? If it's impact, well, then you've got to look at the kind of work you want to do, where that work is, who are the pivotal decision makers and mover and shakers around that work. How can you be more like them, or maybe do better than them at what you see them doing? And start cultivating relationships with people who are already moving down that path. And this is where mentorship is really powerful. If you can talk to someone who has the role or the job that you think is ideal, they may be in your company, they may not be in your company. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't maybe strike up that conversation
Right.
and get some insight on what it was like for them to get there. But that doesn't mean that their experience is going to mirror your experience.
Sure.
But maybe there's a pothole or a trench or a invisible glass door that they could warn you about so that you don't face plant into it and you reach for the handle instead.
Right. Well, and that's something you and I have talked about before, is the difference between kind of building agency versus being manipulating, right? Because again, if you do want to become, and let's just call it plain basic sort of designer versus senior designer.
Hmm.
Is it just the amount of years that makes a senior designer? Is that really all it takes to become a senior? If I want that senior title at some point, because it seems really sexy to me. I don't know.
Well, I mean, a nice title always feels good, right?
Sure
I
does.
mean, something on your business card, if you go back
Yep.
to your high school reunion, I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
whatever
Show your
drives you
mom.
to want a title.
Yep.
But what makes a senior designer is actually a behavior set. And the problem is that's me talking. I'll tell you that a senior designer is a designer who has responsibility for not just their own work, but for the work of others. And when I say responsibility, I don't mean that their boss can come and chew them out about it. I mean, they personally will lay up at night thinking, part of my project's a mess. How am I going to help my team fix it? Or how am I going to fix it? Rather than, I mean, my work's good, my work is good, or my work isn't good, and I just need to fix what I'm doing. I mean, there's a level of escalating maturity that should come with levels up in your career ladder, but different orgs have different titles, different levels, different ladders. What one organization calls a senior designer, another organization may call a principal designer, or another person might call a lead designer.
Right.
I mean,
back to that point of the
there.
standardization across places it's a mess.
Wouldn't that be lovely if there were standardization? But no, I mean, it's not like metric wrenches. So, I mean, it's a question of kind of like knowing kind of where you want to be and where you are now. Are you kind of like a competent contributor, or are you an organizer of work, or are you an organizer of people in teams and work, or are you an organizer of, okay, all of my teams are doing good things to a common goal, and there are many teams of many people, or am I like the whole org? When my company does this, all of my teams know that we do this and we don't do that because that's evil and that's good, whatever your definitions of evil and good are. And yeah, you should know what those definitions are. You may find yourself in a job you don't like. All of this is important. And it's all part of kind of leveling up, because orgs will also level you up or not based on your culture match, based on your value match. So, I mean, if you want to be a leader, and your idea of what the company should be doing is very different from the company's idea of what the company should be doing, the likelihood of you leveling up gets kind of tiny.
Yep.
So you may be looking at a move in order to level up in that way. Be aware of that. And there's no shame in parting company with a current employer to pursue an employer who's more aligned with you. That doesn't necessarily mean that anybody did anything wrong. It's just that you're finding a place that is more suited to the value that you can provide if that value is not achievable where you're currently sitting.
Yeah, and that's I mean, it goes back to the advice I try to give so many people, which is don't give up your career for a job.
Right.
You've got hopefully a long and fruitful career ahead of you. And to your point, Christopher, if you're just finding yourself repeatedly bashing your head against the wall, it's going to stunt your growth overall in your career.
Yeah. And I mean, a couple of things that I would say, just blanket wise, maybe this is something that you can't assess for your first job, but maybe for your second, third, fifth job. And I'm not saying that you're meant to have tons of jobs. I mean, the days of having one employer for your entire career are more rare now than they have been for, say, my parents or their parents.
Yep.
But it's also not true to say that the goal is to have a job a year. That's not true either.
Right.
I mean, people like a bit of an attention span too. And if you can speak to why you made your transitions over your career, that's great. But there is something that I will say about the practice and culture of design and experience design specifically, in that there is I've said there's a responsibility component. You're assisting or ruining somebody's life, or somebody's lives. There's an ethical component to it as well. There's a do no harm element to design that everyone should be thinking about. It's like, all right, I'm going to put this tool out into the world. It's going to be great. Lots of people are going to be able to do X. Yep. And I mean, one of my favorite colleagues, Hillary Dixon, who's a researcher, said at one point, when you design the ship, you design the shipwreck. And so you've got to think about, when your system breaks down, where's that going to leave people? If something goes wrong, how are you going to respond? And when you look at your companies, who am I going to work with? Who do I want to work with? Who am I working with right now? How do they handle a failure? How do they handle a breakdown? What does that say about their ethical standards and character? I mean, this is one of the things that made 3M a really good target for me when I made my last move. Is I was looking at two orgs. I wanted to go in-house again because I'd done a bunch of consultancy work, ready to move back inside. And I was looking at 3M and Mayo. And I thought, okay, I'm going to get into deep data and healthcare one way or another, or industrial data, because I've done both, love them both. Yep. And they both had that ethical track record where they're not going to go up and do something because it's expedient. They're not going to let short-term thinking basically destroy an ethical track record. And that was important to me. And I kind of expect that from experienced design professionals. If I see an experienced design professional, I'm gonna make some people angry, engaging in behavioral economics, which is a very shiny consumer experience, marketing friendly blanket for some good stuff
Yep.
but a gigantic raft of dark pattern thinking where we are talking about manipulation, not agency.
Right.
Not
Yep.
always, but often.
Yep.
So you've got to think about, well, where you're going, what do they do?
Do
Are
your
they a
research.
marketing firm? I mean, are they looking to get people to do things? Are they looking to help people do things they want to do already? I mean, so there is
Yep.
that. Think
Yep.
about not just the mission or the purpose of that org, but the soul of that org too, maybe just a little bit. And this is where you can think about things like diversity, about how do they behave across the board? Do they have problems with, say, dude bro culture or something like that? Which, I mean, that can be its own acid set too, depending on who you are and where you live in that matrix of how you're perceived by, let's call it the patriarchy, or in the matrix of domination, if you've ever heard of that.
Yep.
If you're into design justice, which I sometimes am. And it's something to say that, I mean, design is a big responsibility. Diversity of perspective, of life experience is powerful. So if you are a powerful designer, your power is multiplied by putting you together with designers who have different experience, who reduce cumulative blindness, who make your company and your practice and your team more able to deal with the fabric of reality as opposed to one person's experience of it.
Yeah, it makes sense. Christopher, I always learn so much from our conversations. I'm so happy you joined me today, and I'm excited. You got to come back on the show. We're going to talk. We're going to talk more design stuff here in the future. So, I'd love to have you come back. If I want to connect with you, Christopher, where's a great place to find you? If I want to just reach out and talk shop sometime.
Yeah, the two places, I mean, because I am old, the two places you will find me are on LinkedIn and Twitter. So Twitter, literally Chris Stephan, all one word, sharing an S in the middle, and on LinkedIn, Chris Stephan UX. Otherwise, you could just look for Christopher Stephan, Twitter, Christopher Stephan on LinkedIn. And my picture is pretty easy to spot. I'm the guy with the mutton chops. I mean, it's not that hard.
Yeah. Well, good. Again, thank you so much for your insight. I think it's really valuable for people that are interested in UX, people that are getting their first job, and then people that want to grow their career. Again, this is such an important time in the job titles are changing so much. It's hard to keep track of that. So yeah. I'd love to have you come back on and keep the conversation going. So thanks again for your time.
Always happy to chat, Kurt. Thank you very much for having me.
I appreciate it. Okay, everyone. So if you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did, make sure you hit the subscribe button and all the things. And I'm not going to say smash it. Crap, I just said smash it. Okay, go ahead. Hit the subscribe and like and all that stuff. And join us. Next week, we're going to be talking some more about career growth, career transitions, all those different things. And I appreciate you taking the time out to join me and Christopher today. I always enjoy, my conversations with him. So I'm glad you got to sit in on one. So thanks for joining. Hope you have a great weekend. Talk to you soon.